a little bit. Hello, Michael.
I'm working as well. So I'm going
He-
There's Doris.
He's delivering the lunch. Thank you. With extra avocado.
Yeah, good.
It's good for you.
Susan and Paul, good to see you. Hey, Barbara. Hi, Alan. Hi, Fern. Wendy.
Hi, long time no see.
I know, right? Poor Yoni's, he's like the Wizard of Oz back there twisting the buttons as we go from one program to the next. He's amazing. Alan, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm wiped out.
Did you get a good night's sleep between Tuesday and today?
Oh boy, I don't know. But we had a pretty powerful healing service, and that just ended. It's amazing what people are going through, and the strength and the determination that people are showing to get through the most difficult of times. Hi, Karen. Good to see you.
Rabbi, if one wants to contact you, is that by email, by phone?
Right. The easiest would be to call right to the Temple Sinai phone. That's 303-759-1827. You can always email me. It's rabrines@sinaidenver.org. And so those are probably the easiest.
Yeah. I know.
And we'll contact. You know what? I've got a couple classes right after this too. I have a video.
Yeah,
So,
I want to 1 o'clock over Ali, so I have to leave a couple minutes.
okay.
And it's nothing you said. It's nothing you said, but I have to leave.
Okay, we'll get it. Michael Patrol, good to see you. So Lunch and Learn, each week we have just something totally new. It's not a class where we just go in progression like our Parashat Shavua class that goes, from Torah portion to Torah portion, and yet this. Each week we have some kind of different topic. And so what's the inspiration for it? Sometimes it's just because these are things that we love to discuss, and or I find interesting, or Rabbi Jordy Coleman will find interesting. Next week, she's going to be leading Lunch and Learn, by the way, at noon. The topic I had today was was reflected in chapters 12 and 13, specifically 13, of the book of Exodus, this week's Torah portion, in which it mentions the redemption of the firstborn. Now, some of you are familiar that includes the ritual of Pidyon Haben. Now, what the heck does that mean, right? The Pidyon Haben. Has anyone heard that before?
Heard it.
Right, you've heard it. So what does it mean? What's its original context? And then how it evolved. And as many of you might know, that one of the traditions is that the firstborn, the firstborn son from a mother, is redeemed. Redeemed from what? And then we're going to talk about that in a second. And then redeemed by whom? And that's number 2. And there's a role for the Kohanim. Now, the Kohanim are those who are of a special family, the descendants of Aaron within the Levitical tribe. So the tribe of Levites, they don't have land, but they were to be in charge of the temple, the service, the teaching. And within the Levites, there were the special family of Amram, and ultimately those Zadokites, those who were the ones who fulfilled that role, branched off within our people. So we still, to this day, we have people called up in our Torah as either a Kohen, a Levi, or an Israel. And so where's the origin of that? What's the significance of that? What's the significance of Pidyon Haben? Well, if you had any of those questions, this is the place for you, because we're going to look at it from the Torah, a little bit from the Talmud, and a little bit from the commentary, and some modern responses, especially within the Reform movement, because, as you know, the Reform movement, we do not elevate the Kohanim and the Levites above those who are not. So hopefully you'll find it interesting. So with that, let's recite a blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai.
Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam.
Asher kedeshanu
Kedeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'aso b'divrei
Torah.
Praised are you, Adonai, our God, creator of the universe. You've sanctified us with mitzvot, and you've commanded us to engage with words of Torah. So I want to get to screen shared here. And this is what we find in chapter 13. I'm going to employ the Alan Markman rule.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome, sir. How's that? That's a pretty.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So in chapter 13 of this book, now chapter 12 dealt with the last of the plagues, and the children of Israel were getting ready to leave Egypt, and the instructions for the first Seder, Passover Seder. And then chapter 13 sort of goes back and has actually some of the laws of wearing tefillin, and it also has this. So Alan, why don't you read for us these two little passages from chapter 13.
Adonai spoke further to Moses, saying, consecrate to me every firstborn, man and beast, the first issue of every womb among the Israelites is mine.
Now, further on, so to consecrate them, kadeshli, and we see this in the Hebrew, to make them holy, but it's also meaning to set them aside, because if something is sanctified or is made special, it is elevated away from that which is commonplace. Shabbat is elevated from that which is common. So that's why we have for Havdalah, lahavdil ben kodesh lechol, we make a difference, a separation between that which is holy and that which is common. Now, sometimes the translation is between that which is holy and profane, but profane has different connotations in English, and so I think it's a terrible translation. Chol, it doesn't mean profane, it simply means commonplace or banal even. That which is holy is elevated. By the way, when you marry someone, you sanctify them to me. Hare at mikudashli, behold, you are sanctified to me, b'tabadzo, with this ring, right? And so what does it mean when someone is sanctified to you? I.e., that means they are in a relationship to you in an exclusive manner. So this idea that Hashem, God, said to the children of Israel that the firstborn, the Bechor Peter Rechem, the first one who comes out of the womb, is to be set aside for God. Now, note that it says among all of the Israelites, not just the Levites. And in fact, the Levites are not even specifically mentioned. And the idea of Peterachem, of one who was the first to issue from the womb, is also challenged in, well, what happens if someone was born by way of a cesarean birth? What's the answer?
It's still from the womb.
No, not cesarean. So there would not be the answer. It has to be one that comes through the womb, although there were some differences of opinion. So let's get back to the second part of this. This is at the latter part of chapter 13. We'll go ahead and continue.
And when Adonai has brought you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and to your fathers, and has given it to you, you shall set apart for Adonai every first issue of the womb, every male firstling that your cattle drops shall be Adonai's. But every firstling ass you shall redeem with a sheep. If you do not redeem it, you must break its neck, and you must redeem every firstborn male among your children.
I.e., if you don't redeem it. So it's either to be given to those who are in charge of the temple service or the sanctuary, and if you don't, you can't use it yourself because it's designated for someone else. But what do you do about the firstborn male among your children? Verse 14. Go ahead and continue.
And when in time to come your son asks you, What does this mean? You shall say to him, it was with a mighty hand that Adonai brought us out from Egypt, the house of bondage. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, Adonai slew every firstborn in the land of Egypt, the firstborn of both man and beast. Therefore I sacrifice to Adonai every first male issue of the womb, but redeem every firstborn among my sons.
Right. So one of the things that we're most used to in a Passover Seder, there is in the four questions, what is this service to you? And of course, over time, we've taken that to express the whole Passover Seder, and i.e. it's with an impatient, bratty son who says, hey, stop with all the talking and the praying, let's get to supper. And instead, the avodah hazot, the service that was first mentioned in relationship to the Passover, wasn't a Seder at all. It was rather this whole ritual of the redemption, the pidyon haben, the redemption of that firstborn. And again, let's narrow that down. Why did we have the redemption of the firstborn of the Israelites?
Because Pharaoh wanted to slay all the firstborn Israelite males.
Not Israelite, everybody. Remember? So God said, I'm going to send the destroying angel throughout Egypt, and all the firstborn will be killed. And that's the firstborn of the house of Pharaoh, all the way through anyone, including animals. Therefore, you have to do something special in order to protect your firstborn. What do you have to do?
Blood on the lintel of your
Right, exactly. And so we talked about that a little bit earlier in the week. You put blood on the doorpost and on the lintel of the door of your home, so that the destroying angel Pasach will leap over, will pass over Batenu, over our homes, and in reflection of that Leil Shmurim, that night of foreboding that we had to protect ourselves, we had this ritual. And so that's the original connotation that we had with the of that line. What is this service to you that your children will ask? Number one. Number two, the sense that we continue to have a redemption of that firstborn. So let's get back to the text. I just want to get a couple other pieces in here. So in the book of Numbers later on, it indicates there's a little evolution of it, and it talks more specifically about what it would mean to redeem a firstborn male. So I don't know, Alan, go ahead and continue if you would.
The first issue of the womb of every being, man or beast, that is offered to Adonai shall be yours, but you will have the firstborn of man redeemed, and you shall also have the firstling of unclean animals redeemed. Take as their redemption price from the age of 1 month up the money equivalent of 5 shekels by the sanctuary weight, which is 20 gerah.
Right. And so to this day, if you had a son that had a pidyon haben, and our Joshua had one, we found a Kohen, and we got their special coins, which surprise, surprise, you can buy in the shuk in Israel. and you give it to the Kohanim, and you have a special ceremony. I'm going to get now to, this is the chapter in the Talmud, Zvachim, which relates how this evolved. And the surprising piece here that I want to get to, stop share, good, is we're used to the idea of the Levites, number one. Sorry, I got this over here. That the Levites, number one, were the ones who were in charge of the temple service, the sacrifices, etc. And from the Levites, then there were the Kohanim. But originally, it wasn't just the Levites and the Kohanim. Rather, it was all the firstborn. Remember, it said, all the firstborn male shall be mine, i.e., so within your family or within the various tribes, the firstborn would be I don't know, I suppose our modern equivalent would go to the rabbinate, right? They're not going to work in the store. They're not going to work on the farm. They're going to go to study and then to have as their life occupation the work in the temple, the work, the religious work and service of God. And that was the original intent. At some point, it evolved. Now, this passage in Zvachim in the Talmud, it talks about that shift from the firstborn of anyone being leading the service and to just the Levites. So let's get back to that passage. This is Zvachim. Anybody would like to read from the Talmud? And again, just as a reminder, the bold are that's the actual translation from the Talmud. The lighter print comes from Adin Steinsaltz. These are his connecting interpretive additional words. So who would like to read from?
Sure, the other Alan like to read.
Okay, go ahead, Alan.
The Mishnah teaches until the tabernacle was established, private altars were permitted and the sacrifice service was performed by the firstborn. The Gemara relates Rav Hana Ba Rav Kina was sitting before Ray Chisda and was reading this verse with regard to revelation of Sinai, which said, and he sent the young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. The young men referred to in this verse were the firstborn of the Jewish people. Rav Hista said to him, this is what Rabbi Asi said. They sacrificed the offerings and then created to serve.
And then ceased to serve.
To serve after the day, but also did so until the tabernacle was established the following year.
Okay, I'm sorry, I messed you up because I moved it up.
That's okay.
So they sacrificed any of the firstborn. They sacrificed the offerings and then they ceased to serve. After that day, the firstborn no longer performed the sacrificial service. And now from Rav Huna, if you'll continue. Alan, you're muted, honey. Alan, you're muted. All right. So let me just go ahead and read it. Rav Huna thought to raise a contradiction from the Mishnah, which states that the firstborn performed not only the sacrificial service on that day, but also did so until the tabernacle was established the following year. So until the tabernacle, and we're talking about the tent of meeting that was in the wilderness and then ultimately became transformed into the temple under King Solomon. But until that tabernacle was built in the wilderness, the firstborn did the sacrifices. As it is taught in a Baraita, until the tabernacle was established, private altars were permitted. The sacrificial service was performed by the firstborn, and all animals were fit to be sacrificed. A domesticated animal, an undomesticated animal, or a bird, males and females, unblemished and blemished animals. All animal sacrifices were brought from animals and birds that were kosher, but not from non-kosher species. So related to this whole idea of the Pidyon Aben is that the firstborn will be that which, that person, that young man, who will dedicate himself to the temple service, but it doesn't have to be a Levite. It doesn't have to be a Kohen. It can be just about anyone. Now, what happens if you say, I've got a boy and I need him on the farm. I need him to work with the family. That's when you do the Pidyon Aben. You say, you know what, we'll give the priests these 5 silver coins, and that will be the redemption so that my boy doesn't have to go work in the temple. Chos v'chalil. Okay, let's stop for a second and give some time for questions before we continue, and then we get to the, go ahead, Susan.
I don't have a question. I just have to say we did this for Jeremy, and Jeremy is serving God in Israel.
Right. Right. No, he's serving God in Israel because he's a fabulous Jewish man. But the service of God that they were talking about was working specifically in the temple.
I'm kidding.
Yeah. So who was the Kohen that you used?
I think it was Paul's cousin's a Cohen.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
I mean, we did do it.
Yeah. Did you have the old silver dollars, or how'd you use it?
Yeah, we had the old silver dollars, and personally, I wanted him to keep them.
He went up to Blackhawk. Okay, Arnie.
Just, I want to clarify something. Kohanim have to do a pidyon haveh as well, correct?
Oh gosh almighty. I don't think so.
Okay. No, because I'm a Kohen, but I know back there was an Orthodox synagogue.
No, because
He did not.
right. No, because you're not reading from it. And that's the whole big deal about Kohanim. I mean, they may not know a Kiddush from a Kaddish.
Right.
But they do know that they're supposed to go up first for an aliyah, number one. Number two, I'll have someone who is a total Alma who has no understanding of Judaism whatsoever, but they say, I'm a Kohen, therefore I can't go to the cemetery, right? And so what's the whole deal about not going to the cemetery? They don't go to the cemetery because the Kohanim have to keep themselves in an elevated state. Well, this person, again, how are they going to, if the Mashiach comes, this person thinks, you know what, they may ask me. I said, well, they may ask someone who is semi-literate in Hebrew, but maybe not. I don't know. Go ahead, Arnie.
Yeah, the cemeteries always make provisions for that, but putting the Kohanim around the outside so they can be visited outside the cemetery, etc. The other thing you said, first time I've ever heard that, cesarean sections do not count as first out of the womb.
You know what? There are teshuvot on it. The ultimate is no.
Really? Wow.
No. It's either petorechem or it's not petorechem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is the pidyon haben before or after the bris?
Oh, it's after. That's so good. Remember, it said from the time of a month after. So the bris, of course, is on the 8th day, and the pidyon haben then has to be on the 31st day after birth, or as soon as possible afterwards.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
If you have give birth to a boy, he is delivered via cesarean section. So, and then you have your second child is a girl. So what's going on here?
So you would not do a pidyon haben in either case.
Okay.
In either case.
No, obviously we don't do it for girls, which we should, but
we would have, if we were writing the original Torah, we would have said, yes, the firstborn, whatever, male or female could do it. But in the old days, they didn't have that. But here's something else. Those of you who had boys, right? You have the Brit Milah is on the 8th day, right? So 8 days after the birth, mommy's not in great shape. Daddy's spinning around like a chicken with his head cut off, right? Family has barely any time to come in, right? You're trying to figure it out. And again, it's the firstborn even more so because everyone's trying to figure it out, right? I suppose the first thing you learn is that when you change the diaper for a baby boy, you have to have 2 new diapers, or at least a protection. You take off the diaper, you put one on top so that you don't get sprayed. But so to have a Brit Milah on the 8th day, who's coming over? And besides, especially with our firstborn, we were boiling everything, and you don't want to be near anybody. And so having you might think, well, what does a Reform Jew want to have to do with a pidyon haben? Well, I suppose, to be honest, a great number of them don't, but a great number of us do. Why? Because 31 days after the birth, finally, mommy's up to having a little party, right? And the kid looks like something. When the baby first comes out after 8 days, you look and you go, oi. And that's when, after a while, when it's cute, you say, oh, it looks like mommy, it looks like daddy. Your mom says it looks like you, and her mom says it looks like her. So, but in 8 days, you're all saying, no, it looks like you, honey. It looks like you. Because what is it? At 8 days, a little smush face. At 30 days, you got a little baby. It looks like a nice, cute kid, right? And so you can have a nice celebration, and it's quite nice. So there's something for the modern family here, even if you don't say, well, I'm not redeeming him from working in the temple, as if, God forbid, right? Any other questions on this? Okay, Arnie.
One last question. I guess Reform does not do duchenin, correct? Is that?
No and yes. No and yes. So,
yes.
right. So the duchenin is especially during the festivals, in which you have everyone who is a Kohen coming up, and they put the talus over their head, and they raise out their arms. They do a Dr. Spock. You can see behind Arnie is the hands that are given. And they recite the Birkat Kohanim. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav v'lecha v'chonecha, Yisa Adonai panav v'lecha v'semnecha shalom. May God bless and protect you. May the Lord raise the light of his countenance upon you, and may God grant you the blessing of shalom, of peace. So they're saying this. Now, note that in this Orthodox shul, they'll call up all those who are Kohanim. But as I mentioned, just because they're Kohen doesn't mean that they know an aleph from a beit, right? They may have no education whatsoever. And so the chazan, who may or may not be a Kohen, will be near them, and those who are Kohanim will raise their hands. And again, they put the talus over their faces, so you don't think that the blessing is coming from them; it comes from God. And the Kohen will go word for word, right? He'll go Yevarechecha, and then the crowd will go Yevarechecha, and then they'll go Adonai, and they go Adonai. So they're going word for word. Why? So as to not embarrass someone who doesn't know how to recite that blessing. In the Reform movement, we did away with the idea that Kohanim have a special role to play, simply because you claim that your father and your father's father and your father's father's father, going back 4,000 years, is a descendant of Aaron and was a Levite, right? Well, even the great prophet Ezra said, pretty hard for us to determine the yeches, to determine exactly if someone truly is valid as in their claim to be a Kohen. So Reform movement says, let's not do that. But we do have the priestly blessing, and I frequently will do it at the end of a service, certainly during times of great simcha, whether it's a bar mitzvah or a wedding, and I will raise my hand, but not in such an obvious way. And so to recite the blessing either for the couple, for the bar bat mitzvah, or for the community, to recite the blessing. But we don't call everyone up just because they're a Kohen to it.
One last little pearl, which kind of feel is a scam, but there's a site you can go to. You send them a nasal swab or a sputum sample sent off to Israel somewhere, and they'll tell you there's a certain mutation or sequence on the Y chromosome, which is like infinitely more common in Kohanim. Have you heard of this? And you send it to them, and they'll tell you whether your lineage really is, if you want to know.
Right.
Which
And
I
how
think
much
is,
do you have to pay for this?
I'm sure a lot, and I'm sure it's as good as trying to find out what your dog is as well, So, but it's interesting. I mean, if there's a buck in it, someone's going to try to make a buck out of it.
It's a scam on so many levels. First of all, Barbara, you're right. It's going to cost you more than 5 shekels. With 5 shekels is about $1.50, right? So I assure you, it's more than 5 shekels. But beyond that, it's not just the DNA. One is a Kohen because their father was a Kohen. If your mother was the daughter of a Kohen, then you're not a Kohen, but you might still, through her, have the DNA from her side. So in that case,
Y chromosome.
No, they claim it's on the Y chromosome. That would mean it would have to come from the father.
I forget the name of the company who analyzed the DNA. They charge, I think, $65. Well, I know, I paid.
To be a Cohen? Well-
No, the non-Cohen, what's the company, Generosity or?
Ancestry.com.
Oh, that's
Yes, yes.
but that's not to get a certificate saying you're a Cohen.
No.
All
But
right.
if
So
you
Yeah.
can't put your fingers that way, you're definitely not.
all right.
I just said that to
So now
balance off the fact.
in the book of Numbers, it gives us the movement from the firstborn of all the tribes just to the Levites. And I'll read this real quick. Adonai spoke to Moses saying, and I, behold, I have taken the Levites from among the Israelites in place of all the firstborn. So this was the movement from sometime after the sin at the golden calf. The first issue of the womb of the Israelites, the Levites shall be mine. And why? Because at the sin of the golden calf, it was the Levites, the tribe of Moses, which abstained from that sin. So let's see what Rashi has to say here. I'll read it real quick. I want to get to this response. This means, it says, Vani hine lakachti. This means that I, and whence do I claim? I claim the right on them from among the children of Israel, that the Israelites should have to hire them for my service. It is through the firstborn, to whom I surely have a title, that I have a claim on them, the Levites. And so I take them in the firstborn's sons. So I'm taking the Levites instead of the firstborn of all the other tribes. For originally the service, the priestly functions, was performed by the firstborn of all the tribes. But when they, the Israelites, and among them their firstborn too, sinned by worshiping the golden calf, they became disqualified, and the Levites who had not worshiped the idol were chosen in their stead. So that gives us that movement that originally the Torah was not going to be, was not instructing for just the tribe of Levites to run the temple service, but rather was the firstborn of all the tribes, which would have been much more democratic and much more in keeping with the egalitarian spirit of Reform Judaism, that regardless of tribe, that you have a place in it. So before we get to the Reform movement's take on this as to really, do we still do anything like this? I wanted to get any other questions. You're questioned out. Okay. So let's see what we got. Okay. So I want to get first to the idea of the priestly status. Oops, I messed up there. Good. The priestly status within the Reform movement. As you guys know, we have done away with that. So here's so who would like this? About 10 years ago it was asked. Anybody?
I'll read it.
Okay, Fern, no, go on. Fern, go ahead.
Okay. I am submitting this query on behalf of a congregant. According to the North American Reform Movement, a child need not be born of a Jewish mother in order to inherit Jewish status. Rather, it is enough that the child be the offspring of one Jewish parent, either father or mother, and be raised as a Jew in order to be considered a Jew by birth. Would a similarly gender-neutral policy apply to the kahuna, priesthood? Traditionally, a child is considered a Kohen or a Levi if his or her father enjoyed that status. In the view of Reform Judaism, can a child inherit priestly or Levitical status through the maternal as well as through the paternal line?
Okay, so the question that was asked, and this is the answer, the response, the teshuva. So Fern, if you'll go ahead and continue.
Reform Judaism does not recognize a hereditary priesthood. This statement, presented without dissent in our official CCAR publication, describes a fundamental aspect of our religious worldview. It means specifically that the tradition of priestly status is irrelevant to us as a religious category and plays no role whatsoever in Reformed Jewish observance today. Our common Reform practice testifies to this fact. In our communities, the Kohen receives none of the privileges to which he is entitled under traditional Jewish law and custom. Most notably, we have long since abolished the practice of granting him the first aliyah, that is, of calling him to the Torah prior to anyone else.
Okay, continues on just for a little bit.
By the same token, we do not enforce any of the stringencies that traditionally apply to the priest in matters regarding marriage and ritual purity. Since we do not look forward to the rebuilding of the temple and the resumption of sacrificial worship, we have no purpose or interest in perpetuating caste distinctions based in the ancient biblical cult. And in the absence of such a purpose or interest, it would arguably be unethical for us as a movement dedicated to an egalitarian vision of Judaism to maintain such distinctions in any form, even if it be gender neutral in its structure. It follows that there is not and should not be any uniquely reformed version of the kahuna or redefinition of its rules.
Kahuna is not the big kahuna. It simply is it means the priesthood, i.e. those who are kohanim. If you'll continue, and I made reference earlier to the word yeches, which is some kind of connection. In this case, they're using it as inherited status.
To say that priestly yichus, inherited status, is irrelevant to our religious life should not suggest that the awareness of priestly status has completely disappeared from among our people. Reform Jews can and often do acknowledge the fact of their yichus as a matter of family tradition. They will often maintain the title HaKohen or HaLevi in their Jewish names as testimony that they were born to a father of either status. We certainly have no objection to this custom. We would emphasize, however, that when Reform Jews do recognize their priestly or Levitical descent, they express thereby a sense of connection to historical institutions rooted in our biblical heritage, and not to some non-existent Reform version of those institutions.
And then finally,
Rabbi's manual offers an illustration. It declares, precisely because we do not recognize a hereditary priesthood, the ceremony of Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn son, is incongruous for Reform Jews.
And yet,
see if I raise my hand. Given, however, that our colleagues will be called upon to participate in the ritual and interpret its rules, the manual proceeds to summarize those rules as they are formulated in Jewish tradition, and to refer the reader to sources for the traditional Pidyon Haben liturgy. The message is clear. If Reform Jews choose Pidyon Haben for their sons, they are choosing to participate in a ceremony that reflects the context of the hereditary biblical priesthood. Since we as a movement do not recognize that priesthood, there is no Reform gender neutral version of Pidyon Haben. In the same way, there is no Reform version of the kahuna. It is not for us to redefine the essence and structure of a biblical institution that plays no part in Reform Jewish religious life.
good. So that was spectacular reading, first of all.
I am such a good reader.
Yes, you are. Yes, très bien. Okay, so what do we get from that? This is the Reform movement's take on the whole idea of Pidyon Haben, and most importantly of priestly status.
I have a question.
Barbara.
Are there any typical surnames that are related to status?
Well, anyone who has a last name of Cohen or Khan or Katz usually can trace back 3 or 4 generations back that they were Kohanim. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, and how about like Levi, which is
right. Again, so it wasn't until the 19th century that we really were instructed, specifically in Central Europe and France and Germany, to adopt last names. Now, if you were a part of the bourgeois, you could choose your own last name. If you were not able to pay off the local clerk, they would give you a name which you may not enjoy.
oh.
But they were often linked to professions in Germany, and Ellis Island changed all that.
I know
They
that.
signed it at Ellis Island without a second name.
Yeah, a lot of
Said
things.
your name was Barbara Halevi. Guess what? Shoot, that was your last name.
Yeah,
a lot of times people blamed Ellis Island on changing the names, when in fact it was just a camouflage for the fact that they changed their last name because when they came here, they didn't want to be so easily identified as Jews. So they said, "Oh, yeah, we changed it, from Jewison or from Cohen to Jones because of Ellis Island." Well, probably not.
Yes, Rabbi, could you ask, I guess, why in Reform Judaism issues that you're talking about now, the doctrine, is that the original Reform Judaism or is that recent? I'm just curious because it almost goes against trying to preserve custom, to hold the religion still on some sort of a track and not to drift off into something totally different. I know it's a minor thing, but it's almost atypical in the tradition.
Well, no, it's not. Actually, we're probably more accepting of the tradition of someone being called a Kohen or a Pinyan Ben now than we ever were. Primarily because those who were more the original Reformed Jews, again, Central European, French and Germany, and some England when they came here, there were great assimilationist trends that we very much wanted to be considered Hebrews or Israelites. Even the word Jew was considered to be a pejorative in the vernacular. So doing things that helped us blend in was something they were key to. So much so that if those of us who grew up in a very classical Reformed congregation, there was no bar bat mitzvah. Our prayer books had very, very little Hebrew. The Torah portions were not always read in order. They would come up with different portions and different Haftarah portions, not always read in Hebrew either. The songs, the hymnals were dominated by English. And the form, the order, and the observance of our liturgy was very much different than what was more traditional. The first movement back was with the Gates of Prayer. That was not until 1972 by my old teacher and mentor who hired me out of rabbinic school, Chaim Stern. Well, that's my lifetime. Those of you remember the old Union prayer book, the old little black one, right? Go look at how much Hebrew was. By the way, they didn't even call the rabbi. They called the rabbi reverend. So it was a whole different world. What happened in the 70s and 80s and 90s to evolve? Well, a lot of people who, first of all, were no longer interested in the assimilationist practices, number one. Number two, a lot of the people who became Reformed Jews grew up either as conservative or Orthodox. The old central, I come from an old German Jewish background, right? The Rheinstein, which wasn't, by the way, changed. The Stein was not taken off because of Ellis Island. It was very much because my great grandparents wanted to make sure that our family could fit in a little bit easier. But as more and more came from the conservative movement into the Reform movement, or modern Orthodox into the Reform movement, they said, we want a bar mitzvah, we want a bat mitzvah. And so we have more Hebrew and more traditions. Pidyon Haben is one of those. So it was certainly not one of the original things that the Reform movement embraced. But nowadays it is. And here's the one thing, and Alan, I know you have a question, I'll get to you real quick.
Okay, thank you.
The challenge the Reform movement has embraced is that if we have an old tradition that seems out of date, you can either throw it away as they used to. They just said, well, we're not going to do that. Or we can reimagine it in ways that are meaningful to us. And I think that's the modern, that we can reimagine the Pidyon Haben. And by the way, the Pidyon Haben doesn't always have to be in our Reform context with someone who is Peter Rechem, who is the firstborn through the womb. It could be through cesarean, and it could be also, although Pidyon Haben, it doesn't have to be for the son, it could be a celebration of this birth, i.e. a naming, not only 8 days after the birth, but at a time when the family can gather together and celebrate. Where's Alan?
Right here.
Okay, yeah, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, there's a director in Hollywood. His name is Norman Jewison, and he's not Jewish.
Yeah.
So it works both ways.
Yeah, well, it does. I bet you his grandpa was.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I didn't think about that. Thank you.
Barbara?
I have Mark's grandfather's union prayer book, and they don't even open it. It doesn't open from right to left. It opens from left to right.
Now, by the way, the old gates of prayer, it would come in two colors. They'd have a dark blue and a light blue. The light blue ones opened left to right, like English. The dark blue from right to left. And there were those who got really upset. Now, what's the date of publication on that union prayer book?
1945.
That's a late one. The early ones are in the 1890s, and I have some copies of those, which are actually quite fun. And maybe for a lunch and learn, I'll have to get some scanned versions of it. Very, very cool. So
there is some Hebrew.
The 45 one added a lot more Hebrew, and it took out the anti-Zionist pieces. The early ones in the early 19th century, early 1900s, were absolutely anti-Zionist. They did not want us to think that we had a homeland other than the United States, or if you're in England. But after 1936 and the Columbus platform of the Reform movement, we became pro-Zionist. But so you have a new one.
Oh,
relatively. Who else? Louis, you're talking. I don't hear you. I still don't hear you. It doesn't matter. Okay, so anyway, so let's get. I have one more piece here to go. I hope. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Well, can you get to this one? Can you guys see this one?
Nope.
You can't see that one? Shoot. Okay. I wonder why.
You got to share your screen again, I think, and then
I'll do my best. I'll do my best. Shoot.
Natalie, what did you do to Jerry? He keeps fading out.
That's what happens with a virtual background.
Fern, I love your background.
Oh, thank you. This is the old city at dusk. I think I showed it before. In January with nobody around.
Right. So you know what, guys, I'm not doing this right. I think I have too many things on my screen. Let's see if I can get it one more time. That's Dafka. Okay. RJ. Did that work?
yes.
Yay, God bless us.
Yes.
Holy moly. All right. So with that, anyone but Fern. Now this is from the journal Reform Judaism not too long ago, and it talks similarly to it, and then we'll wrap this up. So who would like to read this little piece from What's the Status of Pidyon Haben within Reform Judaism? May it take place after the mother has had a miscarriage? So who would like to read this?
I'll do it.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, go ahead, Barbara.
If you want to, Jerry, be my guest.
No, that's fine.
Okay. Question: what is the status of Pidyon Haben, redemption of the firstborn within Reform Judaism? May it take place after the mother has had a miscarriage? Answer: Reform Jews have only seldom practiced this ritual, as we do not recognize any special status for priests and Levites.
It is therefore.
It is therefore not logical to demand the redemption of the firstborn. If it is done in Reform circles, it is a symbol of a tradition and a tie to the past. Those who want to conduct the ritual should note the following matters. The biblical tradition informs us that the firstborn sons were devoted to the service at the temple and earlier at the tent of meeting. However, this special sanctity that they possess could not be redeemed. It, of course, became necessary to follow such a system as soon as priests and Levites were designated for service at the sanctuary. Naturally, priests and Levites do not need to redeem their firstborn. As for the rest of the Israelites, it is incumbent among traditional Jews to redeem all firstborn males. The child, however, is not considered firstborn if the mother had a miscarriage and if that fetus was more than 40 days old. Furthermore, if there is any question whether the child really is the firstborn or not, then no redemption is necessary. We should also note that the duty of redemption falls upon the father, and if for some reason he fails to do so, it is up to the son to redeem himself at maturity. In time, it became customary for some other male relative, or perhaps a Beit Din, to act in lieu of the father and to redeem the child. 5 shekels is the sum set by the Bible for the redemption, and according to tradition, it had to be presented in coinage. In some periods of Jewish history, special coins were minted for this purpose. In most periods, the money was either returned to the child's father or distributed to the poor. The act of redemption may also be used to give money to a poor individual of priestly descent. The ceremony itself is held on the 31st day after birth, for by that time tradition found the child is viable. It may occur even if, for health reasons, circumcision has not yet taken place. The ceremony involves a simple Aramaic or Hebrew formula in which the father presents his son to the priest. The priest asks whether he wishes to redeem it, and the father replies, and the coins change hands. It concludes with a blessing over a cup of wine, as well as the priestly benediction. In some periods, special trays of silver have been fabricated for use during this ceremony. Whether a son is actually the firstborn depends on the testimony of either the midwife, the mother, or the father. This question, of course, arises principally during multiple births. As stated at the beginning, the ceremony is not necessary but optional. Walter Jacob, Chair, CCAR, Responsa Committee.
Right. And many of you guys met Walter Jacobs when I had my installation some 16 years ago. He came out and was our scholar in residence. So the Reform movement plays homage to it, but does not incorporate it as one of our significant traditions. And yet, as I mentioned before, and the reason why we're focusing on it, because you might ask, why are we focusing on it? Because it's in this week's Torah portion, and I didn't want you to read through it and go, what the heck is that all about? Now you know. Number 2, the evolutionary status of what the Levites were from now they are understood to be those who are given the prerogative of leading the temple service. And of course, especially within them, the Kohanim, that family, the descendants of Aaron, to be the ultimate leaders of the priestly service. But originally that was not the case. It was the firstborn of any of the tribes. So it sort of harkens back to the idea that within the Reform movement, we look to see how we can reimagine some of the opportunities for leadership and make sure that there are ways in which we can bring in not only those who are not from a specific family, the Kohanim, but also those of different gender and those who are of different personal status, to say, you know what, your leadership is not excluded. I think that's a hallmark of the Reform movement. So Arnie, I know you had a question.
I guess it's just a question. It's always confused me because it's mentioned in that section you just read. The 40 days, miscarriage versus live birth, etc. I thought the Talmud says you're not alive until the 40 days post-birth. Here they're describing the miscarriage more than 40. I'm all confused here. When are you alive in Judaism?
What they had, remember that was 31 days after viability, but actually that's the same reason given for a Brit Milah, that we waited. Why was the Brit Milah not until 8 days? That also was for viability of the child. And we might think, what does that mean, viability? Well, infant death is still something that plagues much of the third world. And by the way, the United States is one of those countries where infant mortality rates are much higher than they are in.
You went out?
In other places like in Europe. So if your child dies within the first couple of days of birth, there were different ways of mourning practices than after the 8 days, of course. And so so his ruling about the 30 days versus the 8 days are similar. Go ahead, Mark. Yeah, you have to unmute though. Go ahead.
When my oldest son was born, I just thought everybody had to do a Pidyon HaBen, so I asked Rabbi Zwerin, and I just made a donation, and he said whatever prayer is said at that on that Shabbos, whatever the night was after he was born. But since then, I realized that I never see that in the temple anymore.
Well, again, the Pidyon HaBen is not one that necessarily has to be just at the temple. It could be in anywhere. And more often than not, my namings and even the Brit Milah, when we're doing a Brit Milah, those are not always done in the sanctuary. Families choose to have it wherever. Sometimes they have it at, the mother and the father's home, sometimes in the grandparents' home. I usually try to talk the young couple, saying, you know what, the last thing you want with a brand new baby is to have a whole bunch of people coming into your home, tramping their schmutz on their shoes and having their little kid touch all the stuff. You know how little kids put everything in their mouth and they touch it. And so it doesn't take me long after explaining it in that way for the young parents to say, yeah, let's have it at our parents' home, or we'll have it at the temple. And so that's good. So we don't always have it at the temple. Pidyon HaBen is still rare, not that rare, however. I usually do one or two a year, and I have a little ceremony. And again, what I try to emphasize, especially in this era, in this 21st century, we have the young parents in Denver, obviously. We have grandparents who live, this one in Florida, that one in California, this one in New York, and they're all over, and they can't come in within 8 days for a Brit Milah. So, okay, we have it. We have another ceremony after a month. Give them time to come in. And that eases a little bit of the strain, because sometimes her mom is there right at the time of birth and stays. And then his mom starts asking, well, when do I get to see the baby? And so her mom has to leave before his mom comes in, and sometimes they can be there at the same time, and boy, is that fun.
Indian Seinfeld.
I know. It can be, it's a world wrestling match with young grandmas. But it's you know what it is. Everyone's excited. Everyone's thrilled for the baby. Everyone's thrilled for the young parents. And the Pidyon HaBen, although I don't take seriously this idea of this child being redeemed from priesthood. I don't even know what that means, but I like the idea of us transforming this old tradition into something that gives the family and friends a chance to come together and celebrate a young life and hold a baby when they're strong enough and big enough that you can actually hold them and think, "Oh, look at it! He actually made a little smile. Made something else too, but okay, we got something." Anyway, that's all I got. What do you think?
Good.
Very good.
I know there's another program coming on real quick, this Kavod on the Road or something like that. And Yoni, you and I are going to get together. Is it 1:30, 1:45? Tell us what time.
Yeah, 1:30 looks good to me.
Is that okay? Good. So everybody, thank you. Next Thursday, it's Rabbi Jordy. I'm going to be doing Friday night service with Rabbi Susie. And hopefully you guys will tune in and be able to see you and celebrate. Yoni, thank you again. Today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.